So today I'm joined by Tricia Nelson. She's an emotional eating expert, a TEDx speaker, and her TEDx talk actually has garnered over 2 million views on YouTube. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. So Tricia's the host also of a really popular podcast called The Heal Your Hunger Show and has spent over 30 years researching the hidden causes of addictive personality. And she's also a featured expert on NBC, CBS, Fox, and Discovery Health. And not only is she an expert, but she herself has gone through healing and identifying the underlying cause of her emotional eating. And through that journey, she lost 50 pounds. And in today's podcast, we are going to go deep on the underlying causes of emotional eating and how you can identify if you actually are an emotional eater or food addict. And we're going to go into a little bit of the science and the other things that contribute to emotional eating, and even more importantly, some actions you can take today to get control and heal your hunger. So join me today while we talk with Tricia Nelson. Tricia, we're going to talk about some good stuff today. And as I alluded to on my intro for Tricia, we've known each other for a while. And so, we've had some good conversations over the years about women's struggles and emotional eating and food addiction. But we're going to get down into the nitty gritty of it all today. But I'd love for you to start and just talk about your own personal journey, because I know from being in a clinic for 20 years that women often feel like they are the only ones that deal with cravings and emotional eating, and that nobody else that they know has this. And I was like, oh, no, no, no,
Right?
no.
Exactly. Yeah, I started way back when, probably as far back as I can remember. I just loved food. I loved to eat. I loved to cook. I loved to serve food to other people, go out to dinner. Like, it was a big highlight for me. And which would have been fine. So as far back as I can remember, I was an emotional eater, but of course I didn't know that word. And I just thought I like food and I did. I just loved everything about food, but the problem was I gained weight easily, and I really struggled with my weight from a very young age. I was dieting in my teens. I was trying all different kinds of things, and my sister had come home and said, "I'm an emotional eater," and I thought, "Well, that's really stupid." Um, but then you can't unhear it, and so even though I really defended that my right to just like food, like I'm nothing emotional about it, I love food. It started to seep into my consciousness, and I observed my behaviors. And like, I'd go out to a Denny's, let's say, with friends, and they'd order a sandwich and it would come with french fries, and they would eat their sandwich and pick at their fries. Well, I would eat my fries and pick at my sandwich, and I'd sit there, I'd feel like a Martian. I'd look at them and I'd be like, how can they leave french fries on the table, like on their plate? That's insane. Or they'd order a hot fudge sundae, and those big long glass, I'm totally dating myself, but those long glass jars with the long metal spoon, and they'd eat like a few bites, and then they'd say, "Oh, I'm stuffed. I can't eat anymore." And I'd be like, "Stuffed? What does that have to do with it? There's hot fudge in that jar." And so I realized I'm not the same as my friends. Like, it's a little bit different relationship here where I'm really attached to ooey gooey chewy foods, like, and I can't eat just one. Like, I eat a cookie, I want another cookie. And so that's what I observed about myself, is that it was different than some people. And when I was trying to lose weight, I was very frustrated with my efforts. Like, I do well for a time. I talk about it in my TEDx talk. It's like the first 2 weeks you're like, I'm doing it, wahoo. And then it gets hard. It gets hard, and it's a slog, and you can't keep doing it. And then you're like, just like, screw it. And you go back to what you love, which is for me, it was the sugar and the processed carbs. And so that's how it went for me over and over and over again. So I could lose weight, but I'd put it back on. And what I didn't know at the time was emotional eating was definitely playing a big role, meaning that I was eating when I needed a boost. I was eating when I wanted to feel better. I was eating when I was stressed. I was eating when I was lonely or bored. So that's really where the emotional eating comes in. It's like we don't need the food for nourishment. And we certainly don't need the kinds of foods we reach for when we're bored or hurt or lonely or angry or whatever. And so the sugar and the processed carbs, they're serving an emotional function in our lives. So that's when I realized, wow, if I don't address that, I'm not going to reach my weight loss goals. I'm not going to be able to lose the weight and keep it off. And so I was very blessed to get help with that very early on in my journey. And the success I had was so different than with my experiences around dieting. So I wanted to help other people. And so, fast forward a few decades, and Heal Your Hunger came into being 8 years ago. I serve women online all around the world, and wrote my book. My podcast came after that. And it's just been a beautiful journey of showing people that they can lose weight without dieting if they address this very important piece, that often isn't talked about, which is the emotional eating, food addiction piece.
Yeah, it's interesting that I'm so glad you made that distinction about the types of food. It's a joke that I make, but it is in all reality true. No one will get into their car at 3 o'clock in the morning to buy broccoli.
Yeah, or salad.
So I'm gonna tell this funny story. So I remember when I was in college, so literally I was in college, I had an apartment off campus. I had one of my girlfriends move in from the dorm because the dorm was loud. She hated it. She didn't like her roommate. And we moved in together, and at one point she did something and like it messed up the toilet. Of course, it always happens. You're a girl and you're like, "Oh man, it's middle of the night. I don't have anything because I'm a girl." So we have to go to the store to get a plunger, right? So we're going through the store at 3 o'clock in the a plunger, and I kid you not, we're walking through like the freezer section coming back, and we see this Boston cream pie. So we stop and buy a Boston cream pie. So we have a plunger and a Boston cream pie at 3 o'clock in the morning as a 18, 19-year-old going back to fix our toilet. Like, and I look at that now and I'm like, okay, yeah, what? Because it was an impulse buy. Walking by, I was like, oh, okay, now that I clean out, now that I fix my
It makes
plumbing.
perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I was like, okay, so there's all these things that are underplaying and undermining maybe our best efforts to eat healthy, but it's very, very different than this like cognitive thing. And I want to say one other thing too, because I think this is interesting, is people perceive this as a woman's problem. It is not. Right? Because I
Yeah.
I had a man, many times mansplain me that men don't have emotional eating issues, and we just happened to get past the Super Bowl, and I'm like, "Okay, next time you watch a football game, I want you to have, like, lettuce boats and celery." Right? Because we also
Yeah.
associate food with experience, right? And so I think we have all these things that contribute to how we pair food with our emotions, right?
Yeah, no, it's really true. People don't understand even that they're doing it themselves. And I actually have a quiz on my website where people can find out if they're an emotional eater or even a food addict, because I really see it as a spectrum. But I feel like everybody is somewhere on that spectrum. Like we all can, like I feel like we're wired to have an emotional connection with food. I mean, think of breastfeeding. It's the most, bonding experience there is, early on in a child's life. And so, food, eating, emotions, they do go together. It's just a matter of how far you take it. And so, like for my quiz, for instance, the way somebody determines if they're an emotional eater or a food addict, it's really two main qualifiers. One is the level of control they have. Like, can they course correct? Can they pull back? Like, you have a bad night, fine. Then you're good the rest of the week and you're, back on track. Or do you lose control and then it's weeks or months before you're back on your clean eating plan? And the other is consequences. What are the level of consequences you're experiencing? And, the older we are and the longer we've been emotionally eating, the more consequences we have typically. Then our gut is talking to us, right? Our hormones are talking to us, diabetes, pre-diabetes, heart disease. I mean, there's all kinds of consequences, not to mention depression, anxiety, like low libido, all these things are affected by our relationship with food, by our relationship with our bodies, so if somebody does take that quiz, they'll find out if they're an emotional eater or even a food addict, because on the high end of the spectrum, if your score is higher, you're more in the addictive range, which again, that's a label. It's, let's not get all scared about words, but the thing is, if you compare it to the classic signs of addiction, I was totally a food addict, sugar addict, emotional eater, but to the extent of being food addicted. And when you compare it to the other signs of addiction, like you eat in spite of negative consequences. You're reaching for the sugar, even though your doctor said you're pre-diabetic, right? Or you are eating in spite of your gut. It's affecting your gut. You've got an autoimmune issue and you've got to clean up your diet, but you eat anyway. Or if you find yourself eating more than you used to, like the tolerance, right? It's you need more sugar or more serotonin, in order to feel good, right? In order to, the dopamine hit of it as well. So tolerance is a thing. Or if you stop eating sugar and you get a headache, right? And you're lethargic for a couple days, well, that's a sign of a sugar addiction. Like you've been hooked on it. So there's some very close associations with the classic signs of addiction that totally translate as, into our relationship with food. Even though food you can't stop eating like you can with alcohol or drugs, you can't put the plug in the jug like you can with alcohol, but you can still, my experience, be addicted. And talk about eating late at night or going to the store. I have literally gone to the store in the middle of the night to literally buy binge foods when I just had to have it. Like I just had to have it. So addicted I was. And so I just would recommend, if people are like, I'm not an emotional eater, like I thought once upon a time, I just like food. Take the quiz, find out.
Yeah, I would agree. It's funny that you say that. I remember reading the book by Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue. I'm going to age myself, late '80s, early '90s band, who was very much an addict to drugs and alcohol. And one of his statements was, walking by a table after he had, gotten control of his addiction and seeing people leave like a half consumed glass of wine or alcohol and be like, how do they do that, right?
Exactly. What
You
were
know,
they thinking?
you're like, "What if could you leave, 2 scoops of ice cream still at the bottom of the bowl?" Like, and so I do think almost everybody, or I think I met one guy one time that probably could survive on a Jetsons sort of experience where he would just take pills for food if he could do that. But everybody has some sort of spectrum of that. So I think the idea that me, if I'm emotionally eating, I'm the only one that does it. It's like, no, everybody does, and we're on some sort of plane of it, right?
Absolutely. In my TEDx talk, I start off talking about something that I thought I was the only one who did this. I reenact what I call garbage eating, where I binge on a bunch of food until I'm stuffed, and then I throw out their remains, thinking I'm never eating that again. Like I feel so disgusting. And then a few hours later, when I've digested a little bit and I have a little bit more room in my tummy, I'm like, wait, I threw out some perfectly good cookies, and I go back and I get them. So I'm thinking that I'm the only one who's ever done this. And then, of course, so many people have told me, oh my God, I did that. And all these comments under my talk, like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. So you're so right. Like, we all think it's our deep, dark secret that nobody's ever going to know. And come to find out, it's a common experience.
Yeah, which I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of how this occurs because I think some of it is definitely nurture. It's the you fell down, you get a cookie, you were good, you get a this. We get to go out for ice cream. You have this during your birthday. So we learn these associations. And again, we're not celebrating with broccoli.
Right.
We have these celebrations with food or other things. So I think
Yep.
there's some nurture, but there's some physiological reasons why we have this attachment to food, and I think it's both.
Absolutely, and that's certainly true for sugar especially. Like I was really addicted to sugar and I didn't realize how hard my weight loss efforts were trying to eat sugar still. Like if I ate anything with sugar in it, that's all I wanted to eat. Like, I was addicted to sweet, and
Yeah.
so, there's definitely the physical aspect of literally what we're eating, and the sugar and the processed carbs are addictive, and if you're trying to eat measured amounts, it's gonna be hard. Like, you're gonna go overboard, and the food manufacturers absolutely know this. They are putting sugar into everything, like the most ridiculous things, sugar in potato chips, like that makes no sense, sugar in salad dressings, gross, but our buds get used to it. And then if it's not sweet, we don't want it. So it does keep us coming back for more. We are an addicted nation in terms of the amount of sugar, corn syrup, and every other name for sugar. There's 80 plus names for sugar. And so when they're being snuck into our food, I mean, I show people how to read the labels. And if you don't know all the different names, you'll miss it. Like you'll miss it because like you can have a quote health bar that's got like 5 different kinds of sugar or different names of sugar in there just so they can get more in there, and it's not a health bar, it's a candy bar, you know? So really important that we get hip to the physical aspect along those lines. The hormones and that kind of stuff, obviously that's your zone of genius. And so that plays a role as well, and also I will say, there are other health things like candida and low adrenals and that kind of thing where we're looking for sugar for energy and all that. But again, it's a big problem, and if we don't put a spotlight on it, we're going to keep falling down and not knowing why.
Yeah, it's funny because you were talking about, you make it in 2 weeks, it's like, "Yay, I'm eating clean," and da, da, da. And then there's always, like, 3 weeks is the witching zone, like, so much happens. It's like everybody goes, "Oh, Betty, I'm just waiting for the week that's normal or my life to get normal." I'm like, "Who I haven't had that in 4 decades." Like,
Right. Good luck with that.
like, once I had car keys and a job, like, that's there we go. It's never been normal since then. But, so there's all these different things that sort of trigger it, and so I'd love to really hone in on particularly when things get tough, like, because that's the thing is like we don't do this, as much when things are going. Not to say that we don't do it with celebration, but I would say my clinical experience is that often it's like when things feel really hard, the emotional eating, the food addiction, those things seem to kick into higher gear.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it, it, I always say to people it, all the time, if I had a dollar for every time I heard I was doing good until, like, I was doing great until. We're all, like you said, waiting for life to be just perfect, like, in the environment just perfect for eating clean, and that's not gonna happen. So, the right environment is the wrong strategy, and so we have to have a better strategy than that. When people say I was doing good until, and the until is a death in the family, moving across the country, switching jobs, a dysregulated kid, hormone changes, whatever, it's that's an emotional event. So anybody who's saying that, what they're speaking to is the emotional eating. Like that's for people who are like, I'm not an emotional eater. If you were doing good until, that's when the emotions, took over, when you're flipped out and you ran for cover, in food, because food's what got you through that. And so we that's the relationship with food we need to change. And we also need to change our relationship to stress and have new tools to deal with stress. And so there's never going to be the right and perfect environment. What we need is new tools in our toolbox so that food isn't what we turn to. We need ways to deal with stress. We need ways to deal with our emotions, and the things I have my clients do. I mean, they're learning meditation practice, they're learning, journaling, and we're supporting them in doing these things because you literally have to do something. Like if you're an emotional being, you have to put those emotions somewhere, and we don't want to stuff it anymore with food because we're paying too high a price for that. But we have to process it. Like we are emotional beings. and that's just we're not getting around that. I used to think there was something wrong with me because I was emotional, and people would say, "Oh, don't, you wear your heart on your sleeve. Like, don't be so sensitive," and all this thing. When you're an emotional eater, you are sensitive. Like, you have big emotions, and if you don't learn how to deal with those in healthy ways, you will let any experience where strong emotions happen, you're going to let that tip you over and run to the food.
Yeah, and I do want to say something about the kind of strong emotions or being quote unquote emotional. And I would say, definitely women, we get labeled as emotional, although I would say aggression and anger is a really strong emotion. That's just the only one men are safe to exhibit. So we
Right.
ignore that, and that's just man being a man, but if a woman's angry, she's a bitch, and
Right.
all these other things. But the woman that is highly self controlled, right? As somebody who's highly emotionally self controlled, you are not going to see me lose my cool unless I choose to lose my cool, right? Period. I don't care what's going on. I have extraordinary control. That doesn't mean I'm not a potential emotional eater. Just because
Yeah.
you're not not somebody who becomes very outwardly demonstratively emotional doesn't mean you potentially aren't an emotional eater either.
Well, that's true, and the thing is, food is what we use to tamp those emotions down, like food the reason why it's sugar and carbs that we're turning to and not broccoli is because it works. It works. If when we eat, we feel less, or strong or like we literally unconsciously, and I'm not saying you do this, but I'm saying unconsciously, emotional eaters will use food to modulate their emotions so that they aren't freaking out, but the emotions are happening. It's just we're stuffing them with food. We're tamping them down. We're controlling life, and our reaction to life by turning to food. And that's the reason why we need to have new tools, because having an emotional response to something isn't bad. It's human. It's just, what are we doing with that response? Like, are we yelling or are we writing it out, talking it out with somebody safe? Are we like evaluating, I feel afraid right now. Like, this situation is triggering me. I'm having a strong emotion. Let's see what we can do constructively about that. Like, it's a whole different relationship to our emotions, because in the past we just, and honestly, this is why diets have been so unsuccessful for us, is because if you take away your number one coping tool, then all you have are the emotions with no new tools to deal with them. It's like, let's take away all the sugar and carbs, like processed carbs, right? You don't get to have any fun foods, and you just salads and broccoli. Now you are just like a live wire. Like you don't know which end is up. You might even just find yourself crying because you're unanesthetized. Like you don't have the foods that normally keep you in check. And so, and without those new tools, you're like, geez, I felt better when I was eating. Like, I feel like crap now. I'm crying all the time. Like, this sucks. I'm going back to my old way of life. Well, there is a plan C, and the plan C is to learn how to deal with your emotions in a responsible, healthy way, so that you can feel all your emotions. Because the problem when we stuff negative emotions is we also stuff joy. We don't feel the whole range of emotions when we're numbed out on food. So it is it's and this is why it takes some work, right? It takes some work to overcome emotional eating. You can't just stop on a dime. You have to learn how to relate with your emotions in a different way, relate with food in a different way, and also with your body, because there's the whole issue of hating on our bodies, hating on our bodies, being nitpicky, and then setting ourselves back many steps, in our weight loss efforts by being super critical, hypercritical and judgy, and then feeling like, well, what's the point, right? What's the point?
Ladies, if you're noticing more fine lines and wrinkles, it's not just about aging, it's about the loss of estrogen. And that affects our skin structure, making it drier, thinner, less firm. But here's the great news: I've created Bias Mastery Cream to help. This luxurious bioidentical estrogen cream supports your natural hydration and elasticity. It's packed with nourishing oils like olive, jojoba, aloe, and coconut, So it feels amazing and helps soften those lines and bring back that healthy glow. I've been using it, and let me tell you, my skin has never looked or felt better. It's smoother, more radiant, and those little cracks and creases are way less noticeable. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, check out Biest Mastery on the Metabolic Blueprint website. And that's metabolicblueprint.com/Biest Mastery. That's BIEST Mastery, Mastery. And your face will thank you. Well, yeah, if you go to like an AA meeting and you walk in, there's three things that'll always be present. People will be smoking outside, a ton of coffee, and a ton of sugar, right?
Right?
Because they're like, okay, and we're going to go ahead and insert these so we can take over the alcohol position with the sugar position because they hit the same biochemistry. And I think that's important for people to know is your opiate receptors, the things that sort of turn on or kind of feel good chemistry, the serotonin and all that stuff, and the opiates sort of block out pain, they're turned on. And so you have to kind of work your way through that. And like you said, if they haven't learned the right coping tools, they're white knuckling it. And we
Yeah.
don't get very far white knuckling
I call it switching deck chairs on the Titanic, right? We're
it.
switching from one addiction to another until we go deeper. That's what we're doing. We're just stuffing with something else.
Yes, yes. Now let's talk specifically at night because it's I'm a saint during the day and a sinner at night. Like people will tell me all the time, "Look, Betty, I had my breakfast smoothie with all my stuff in it, and then I had a salad with chicken at lunch." Then they get to home at night and it's like the wheels come off the bus. Now there's
Yeah.
specifically nighttime seems to be the hardest time. I know I have my theories, but
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's true. I'd say about 75% of emotional eaters, from the studies I've done, so about 75% have their hardest time, struggle with food from about 4 o'clock on. And my experience of that and, big time nighttime eaters, they're the ones I talk to as well. And that's usually in part because of stress. Like when you're busy during the day and you're running from here and there and you're kind of loving the adrenaline hit of getting so much done, you might even skip meals because you're like, hey, I'm on a roll. Maybe I'll, shave off a few pounds. I don't need to eat. I'm so busy. Well, we pay a price for that, and late, especially if we're skipping meals, our bodies aren't going to stand for it. Like they will get those calories and then we'll go overboard. So that's the problem with skipping meals. And the other thing is when it's not busy at night, when everybody's gone to bed and things have settled down, we don't have the distraction of our busy. And then everything we were avoiding, like we just kind of were too busy to deal with, it comes up. That conversation that didn't go well, right? The report that came back that didn't have the news we wanted, or the bill that we just opened up. Things pile up, and at the end of the day, our willpower is at the lowest, right? And the food is right there and it's quiet. And so to me that the combination of the quiet and the accumulative stress of the day really does contribute to the nighttime eating. It makes it really hard. And it's hard too because we want to unwind, and oftentimes food helps us unwind. Like when we're just sitting there unconsciously, taking one handful after the next out of the chip bag, there's something kind of meditative about that. Like it's just sort of slowing us down. Our spin is slowing down. And so food serves that purpose. All the more reason why we need to have new ways to de-stress at the end of the day, new ways to deal with all the barrage of emotions that we've stuffed, on account of our busy. So that's kind of what I see for people. And people always say they eat out of boredom, which I think is a bit of a misnomer. To me, it's lack of activity, which allows for more space for things that we don't normally want to feel.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think we all get decision fatigue, like we make thousands upon thousands upon thousands of decisions. And we get to the end of the day and it's like we don't want to make that other decision. And then the emotions come up and then everybody's in bed and you're like, I'm just gonna have a glass of wine and some chocolate and doom scroll my social media.
Exactly.
Because it's,
Yep.
a lot of times they'll be like, I'm having my mommy hour, or, and then that extends into my life where you're no longer having to do that, but you have the same behavior.
Yeah, yeah, we have to throw off stress. Like life is stressful. We have to throw off stress. It's just that we need to find new ways to do it that don't end up having, the backfire effect.
Yeah, yeah. Now, so if somebody were sitting here thinking, well, okay, I think I probably do this. How can someone tell the difference between an emotional eating desire and a physical eating desire, the real hunger?
Yeah, and that's hard because they feel like the same sometimes. I've been doing this work for 35 years, and sometimes I'm like, "No, really, I'm really hungry. Like, I really am hungry." I'll tell myself, "I'm starving." It's like, "Really? Oh, yeah, really." But the thing is, what has helped and what I teach my clients is to eat on a regular schedule. I call it 3-meal magic, which is 3 meals a day with nothing in between, and even if somebody wants to intermittent fast, I say put 12 or 13 hours between dinner and breakfast, but still have a breakfast, because the regular schedule of, meals can help, with 4 or 5 hours between each meal, it can really help somebody start to get acquainted with what's hunger on a physical level and what's hunger on an emotional level, and if you are eating on a regular basis, so much of our problem is we've been such erratic eaters, on every which diet there is, and fasting, starving and then binging. And we're all over the place. And it's like we have to come home and get on a very self-caring, grounded schedule.
Hmm.
Like treat our bodies with love and respect and don't put them on these, roller coaster rides. But it also, when you do that, for instance, the 3 meals and with space in between, what you can do is come to learn about your signals. Like, our signals are off, and people often will recommend intuitive eating. Well, my signals were so off that I would intuit I should eat all the time. Like, yes, chocolate. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the message I'm getting now, And so, the space in between the meals has allowed me to say, okay, you say you're starving. Let's just do a little sleuthing work here. You had a really healthy breakfast, you had healthy proteins and fats and, slow metabolizing carbs, right? So you're doing okay. So you're probably not really starving, like in lunches in an hour, you're probably going to be okay. And so that kind of conversation is easier to have when you really aren't like when you really are on a regular schedule and you can really speak to that and talking to ourselves. It may sound crazy, but we have to do that because our heads are telling us to eat all the time. Like, eat, oh, I'm sure you should go to the break room and get some of that whatever, Susie brought from her party last night or from whatever. And the thing is, we have to kind of talk down that voice and say, like, do I really need that? Is that really what I'm hungry for? And then my experience learning to experience some hunger is not a bad thing either. Like getting hungry in anticipation of lunchtime, that's good. Like, we have to get used to that, and emotional eaters are terrified to feel hunger because we have these signals from way back when that tell us to be hungry is to die. For a lot of emotional eaters, we did have dysfunction in our families, and food was how we got through it. And so, and I certainly did. I had sexual abuse as a child, and food was my go to for solace and for, protection and that kind of thing. So there was a time when food kind of saved my life. And so there's a deep kind of just underlying unconscious belief that like food will save my life. So when you experience hunger in your adult life, you've still got that programming that's like to feel hungry is to die, and it's irrational. It's completely irrational. But that's another reason why starving is not a good plan. And when we open up our window, we go overboard because we just, we need to be grounded. We need to be well fed, properly fed. And we need to not startle our system into thinking we're in starvation mode and we've got to eat whatever's in sight because that is what we do.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. Because it was interesting, because obviously fasting has become very, very, very popular, and I use different forms of fasting with different people according to what's really happening. But I know a lot of women just to have that window narrow slightly, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I didn't know what real hunger felt like. I didn't know the rumbling of the tummy anymore because we eat in anticipation of hunger. Because we've been told by the snack companies that you need to eat 3 meals a day plus snacks. We don't, right? We don't.
Right?
The other thing that I find too is a lot of times my emotional eaters often are grazers. They're like, no, 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 I graze. I graze. And I'm like, that means you have no earthly idea what you're eating.
Exactly.
And anything
And
that
you're
you're
not
grazing
grazing on
on,
broccoli.
yeah, I was like, anything you're grazing on is not legitimate meal material, right?
Yep,
Because that's
exactly.
yeah, that's born out of a lot of different things, and I think sometimes out of necessity for women, especially because we're running, taking care of kids, driving, carpooling. So you end up like, carrying crap in your purse and you're eating constantly, but you're completely unaware of what it is and how much it is too.
Yeah, snacky foods are never a good idea, because we're snacking, we're unconscious what we're eating on the run. I always say put it on a plate, make it count, make it a meal. Otherwise, yeah, those calories, man, we just pack them in and we have no clue as to what we're eating. And snacky foods are always the high calorie, high fat, high processed content.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say especially nowadays, we're probably raising children because we have these kind of lifestyles where families don't eat together, right? They don't have dinner
Yeah.
together. And we're raising children to believe that their meal comes from a bag in the back seat of a car.
Yep, yep, not a good message.
Definitely not a good message. So, what are 3 things that you could recommend that maybe my listeners could do right now to just be aware of their emotional eating? And then obviously we're gonna talk about the quiz because I think that's huge just to identify your own thing. But what are a few things they could do?
Yeah, so, I mean, nobody's gonna like it, but it's slow down. We're so busy. We're so busy. We have to figure out a way to like have less on our calendar, have less of a to-do list. We don't have to be all things to all people. And emotional eaters are people pleasers. In my book I talk about 24 traits and I call it the anatomy of the emotional eater. And these are traits that have nothing to do with food, but they have everything to do with why we eat. And the number one trait is people pleasing. And the thing is, we get a sense of validation from doing things for people, which isn't a bad thing. It's a good instinct, on paper, but we take it too far. We end up like knocking ourselves out, running around trying to please people. And first of all, not only do we really hurt and exhaust our bodies doing that and our adrenals, but also people are never as pleased as we plan on them being. So then we end up resentful, like I put all this work in and all I got was a thank you, and so we go and we have the I deserve it binge, I guess we're tired, we're snacking, we're on the run. And so I just say, take a look at that. Take a look at how much you're doing. See if you can shave some things off and even delegate. We love to do it all ourselves because we do it best, right? Well, that's a problem. We have to get help. Asking for help is so important. So the first thing I would say is just look at your calendar. Like you're stuffed. Like your calendar is stuffed. Too much going on there. You need some kind of time in the morning, so I would recommend like a morning routine, something where you're just tapping in with your divine spirit. I call it putting money in your spiritual bank account. Like do something before you get on TikTok, before you're jumping on your phone. Do something, breathing exercises, stretching, meditation, reading, the Bible, something that is feeding your soul, feeding your soul and also helping you, get just your nervous system in check, and so that's really important as well. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but something where you're tuning in. You're not like just responding or reacting really to everything outside of you. You're tuning in to what's going on inside of you. um, and the other thing I'm just going to say, very practically speaking, is stop jumping on the scale every day. Like, stop jumping on this, stop letting the scale determine how you feel. The scale is a trap. I mean, weigh yourself once in a while. But the thing is, this obsession with the number, it is such a trap because if you give that scale the power to make you feel good, like it says a number you like, you also give it the power to make you feel bad when it has a number you don't like. And either way, it's a setup to eat. So people who are emotional eaters, when we get on the scale and it says a number that we don't like, we get pissed off, especially if we're like putting a lot of effort into it, right? If we're like eating clean and we're going to the gym and then we don't think the number says what it should say, we're just like, screw it. I'm going to eat. Like, what's the point? What's the point? Or what what's also true is when it says something we like, "Oh my god, I lost 4 pounds," then there's just a little bit in the back of our head that's like, "I got room to eat now." Like, now I can have that brownie or that cookie, right? Which will take us down the rabbit hole of eating more than we planned. And so either way, the scale is having way too much power that we're giving it. So I would just say, just step back, put shove it under your bed. Don't look at it. If you look at it, you're gonna use it, right? But that number has way too much power over us, and we need to focus instead of focusing on weight loss, really focus on your self-care. What can you do to take better care of yourself on a daily basis, a day at a time?
Yeah, no, I would agree so much with that. And because I also know after, decades in practice, when I'm talking to women, they'll often say, I remember when I was this whatever perfect weight. And I'll be damned, Trisha, if every single time it's somewhere between 18 and 22. You were also not at sexual maturation. Like there's 1,000 things that were not real then. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how would because I guarantee you there's a time in there where you liked what you look like in the mirror, because that's essentially what we really want. We like that. The number is just arbitrary, right? And it's usually some static number they remember from childhood or early adulthood that's not even a legitimate number for concern, but it is the basis in which our day makes it or doesn't make it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we need to let how we feel about ourselves determine how we feel overall, not what a number says.
Yeah, definitely not. I'm always like, pick out a pair of jeans or something. If you're going to gauge something, get some clothing that you're like, okay, this is my,
Yeah.
my ideal at the moment, and just look
Yeah.
at it that way instead of looking at a number on the scale. So, absolutely. So, obviously, you've got your book. So, your book's available on Amazon, right?
Yep. Yep. It's also
Definitely.
on my website, which is healyourhunger.com, and my TEDx talk is on there as well.
Awesome. And then your quiz. So, tell everybody how to get to your quiz because I think that's super important.
Yeah, the quiz is right there, literally, when you go to healyourhunger.com as well. So it'll just have a button, take the quiz. It's a free quiz. It takes probably 3 minutes to take. But what'll happen is you'll get a personalized score based on your answers and then next steps, and we offer a lot of support. So I say find out your personalized score. Where are you on the emotional eating spectrum? Because that'll really inform what you need to do next in order to heal, and it gets kind of a good first step.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. I want to thank you for being on Menopause Mastery. This has been great.
Thank
Great,
you for
great,
having
great.
me. It's a
Yes.
pleasure.
Yes. Thank you. And, everybody, thank you for listening to Menopause Mastery. If this was an awesome episode for you, please share it with a friend because together we rise. And then I'll be back with you next week.